On air, understandable politics. Hello, political squabbles continue in Poland, and now presidential elections are approaching. They will take place in mid-May. Two eternal rivals, PiS and the Civic Platform, are once again slinging the finest mud at each other. They fight like spiders in a jar, to put it mildly. The country barely recovered from the most scandalous parliamentary campaign in Poland's history, and now mutual accusations, compromat, and even criminal cases are back in play. Donald Tusk was accused of a coup d'etat. I think you can guess who initiated it. PiS, having received a slap, is trying to retaliate, and the Grey Cardinal of Polish politics, Jarosław Kaczyński, seemingly can't get used to losing influence. So targeting the premier is one tactic to cast a shadow not just on Tusk, but on the entire Civic Platform and their candidate in the upcoming elections.
Back in March last year, the leader of the Law and Justice Party, Jarosław Kaczyński, accused Tusk of organizing a coup and demanded a life sentence for him. Kaczynski described the situation in the country as catastrophic and claimed it played into the hands of foreign states. Now the matter has moved to a practical level.
Next, the classic Polish scheme. In late January, Bogdan Święczkowski, head of the Constitutional Court, who once worked properly in the PS government, initiated the criminal case. The court's decision was approved by Andrzej Duda, also a PiS member, who appointed Święczkowski to the Constitutional Court last December.
The president also noted that there are a number of recurring and ongoing blatant violations of the law by various individuals currently exercising executive power. Meanwhile, Tusk's current government considers the current composition of the Constitutional Court illegitimate due to the presence of judges appointed as a result of a controversial judicial reform during the PiS government, which also led to disputes with the EU.
The judicial reform is a separate topic. Let's take a minute to show how PiS reshaped the country for themselves.
At the initiative of Law and Justice, a law was passed in Poland requiring Supreme Court judges to retire upon reaching retirement age. The changes also gave the president additional powers to appoint and dismiss Supreme Court judges and allowed the Sejm to elect members of the National Judicial Council. The 2019 reforms became scandalous due to their wording. They placed Polish law above pan-European laws. The clear violation of EU treaties did not bother the Poles. Warsaw faced fines from Brussels of €1 million per day. Soon, even this punishment was lifted.
Critics believe all the changes had one goal: to make the courts dependent on the executive branch.
Poles saw the reform as an attack on the independence of the judiciary. They took to the streets, actively protested, but there was no revision or repeal of the rules. Moreover, the reform continued. Within its framework, a new law was adopted a few years later. A disciplinary chamber was formed, which can remove judges for alleged political activity.
The European Commission filed a lawsuit against Poland in the European Court, but Warsaw simply replied, "Do not interfere in our internal affairs." Now let's return to the criminal prosecution of Tusk.
The choice of prosecutor to handle the case also suggests that the criminal case is a clear political revenge. It's Michał Ostrowski. He is said to be very close to former Minister of Justice, ex-Prosecutor General Zbigniew Ziobro, who was involved in a high-profile scandal with illegal wiretapping of right-wing justice competitors.
Tusk's behavior showed that he doesn't care about such accusations. As a result, it's unclear what is legal in the country and who ensures its enforcement.
Tusk decided that the coup case was not as important as playing table tennis. The politician himself wrote about this on social network X. He attached photos of the game to the post with the caption, "Coup d'etat."
Tusk posted a video on social network X showing him playing table tennis. Off camera, someone tells him that the leader of the opposition party Law and Justice considers him guilty of a coup. Relax, we have serious matters here. We'll deal with it later. Tusk replies with a laugh and continues playing tennis. The conflict between the cabinet and the judiciary has reached the point where the government does not publish constitutional court rulings in its bulletins, preventing them from gaining legal force, and fights with judges appointed by PS. Cancellations of their verdicts have already begun, which could worsen the criminal situation in the country. The crisis escalation has exposed contradictions within the Polish establishment, showing how far the elites in Warsaw are from the people and engaged in internal strife. Thus, the outgoing president already supported Sikorski on February 6th and stated about repeated and gross violations by Tusk and his ministers. In turn, Interior Minister Tomasz Siemoniak called the involvement of Deputy Prosecutor General Michał Ostrovsky in the investigation a disgrace.
Upon coming to power in the fall of 2023, the civic platform immediately went on the offensive against its enemies. Out of power and even out of the country, they made quite a stir. Former Deputy Minister of Justice Marcin Romanowski fled to Hungary, and his boss Zbigniew Ziobro was detained live on the Republic channel. Tusk is trying to consolidate influence in his hands. Having seized power, he began to take over Polish state institutions by the dozens. Immediately after the elections, he started by dismissing the heads of all special services, and a couple of months later, he reached state media. He took and changed all the leadership.
Tusk has reasons to be offended. PS-controlled propagandists persistently smeared him for a long time. They criticized and rudely mocked him, disregarding all norms of decency. On the eve of parliamentary elections, pro-government media openly mocked and destroyed opponents from the civic platform. Becoming prime minister, Tusk did not delay his counterattack, threw the curators of this disgrace out on the street, and then completely liquidated state media.
Law and Justice claims it was a takeover. An illegal takeover of state media because Law and Justice indeed provided those media with quite an the possibility of independent work. But the civic platform, Donald Tusk, when they took over power at the end of 2023, they very quickly, by force, took everything for their benefit, changed the leaders, and the agenda completely changed. So it was on the edge of the law. I don't know how it will be determined in the future, but I know it shouldn't be like this. This is absolutely not a democratic way of transitioning state media when power shifts from one party to another.
In a free country, there is no limit to political purges. Tusk elegantly calls them a forced reboot of the state. At the beginning of last year, pious politicians were even led out of the presidential palace by the police. Duda's protection didn't help them with Interior Minister Wąsik and Kamiński.
Polish police detained former Interior Minister Mariusz Kamiński and his deputy Mateusz Wąsik at the presidential palace in Warsaw. They were there for the appointment ceremony of Andrzej Duda's advisors at his invitation. Kamiński and Wąsik were detained when Duda left for a protocol meeting. Upon returning, the head of state was supposed to talk to the ex-minister and his deputy. This happened on January 10th, and already on the 23rd, dictator Duda decided to pardon former pious deputies despite the court's decision.
Pius swallows loud slaps, but sometimes tries to respond, as in the case of the criminal case against the current premier. And they are very hopeful for their candidate's victory in the presidential race. First, they need to create confusion within the ruling coalition, and then, perhaps, early parliamentary elections can be held. The thirst for revenge is enormous.
Politicians of law and justice are now really facing various judicial and prosecutorial cases. We know that one of them is now hiding in a shelter in Hungary, Orban. Another was arrested in London, in Britain. So, if the civic platform completely takes over power now, Pius will be in a very difficult situation because there will be no one to defend them, even at the legal level.
The Law and Justice Party has something to fight for. Politicians are mired in corruption and scandals. For years, they practically robbed citizens, hiding behind high positions and state programs. They covered for each other in shady schemes.
What about the visa scandal? 366,000 visas were sold to migrants from Muslim countries for $5,000 each. First, they took money from them, then sprayed them with water cannons. And with a straight face, they lied that Belarus was provoking the migration crisis.
The case was very high profile, and Deputy Foreign Minister Piotr Wawrzyk was detained.
As Polish media reports, Wawrzyk was involved in a scheme where intermediary companies offered people to obtain visas to Poland, bypassing the official procedure for a significant sum of money. As a result, migrants from Asia and Africa were able to illegally enter the territories of Schengen Agreement member countries, including Germany. It is noted that multiple entry visas were particularly popular among such clients.
The largest corruption scam, shocking the public.
After the change of power in Poland, a commission was created to investigate the crimes of the so-called visa mafia. It turned out that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs pressured consular departments, and visas were issued to anyone willing to pay the corrupt officials. Kickbacks were passed to Edgar Kobas, the right-hand man of Deputy Foreign Minister Piotr Wawrzyk. For each such visa, Wawrzyk, the control body, believes received $5,000. Kobas, by the way, confessed.
We've already talked about the dealings of former Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. Donald Tusk caught him red-handed. Morawiecki decided to play big.
Mateusz, everyone knew for a long time that you could do business on respirators, masks, visas, and generators, but to do it on ammunition, and for an amount of 14 billion zlotys, about $3.6 billion.
And the legend of Polish politics, an even bigger legend of corruption. Jarosław Kaczyński, leader of the Law and Justice Party, elevated theft to a heavenly level. In 2019, he tried to build skyscrapers. Kaczynski was suspected of attempting to extort money from a major businessman. The media included a transcript of their conversation.
In the published tapes, the head of the Law and Justice Party talks with an Austrian investor who decided to bring a recorder to the negotiations. The men discussed the construction of 2 skyscrapers, K-towers, in central Warsaw, costing about 300 million euros.
Notably, the company Srebrna was supposed to build these towers. It belonged to the Lech Kaczyński Institute. Needless to say, who runs the institute? The money for construction, 300 million euros, was to be taken from PKO banks. Moreover, the head of the Law and Justice Party tried to do this over the phone, threatening with his authority.
Regarding the corruption accusations against the previous Morawiecki government, yes, the Tusk government creates a narrative that the previous government was so corrupt, so filled with people who clearly stole state money, that it requires absolutely harsh actions. Actions that need to be investigated to the bare ground, as these scams are enormous in terms of the amount of missing money.
While PS was cutting state budgets, Poles began to take to the streets more often. Protests against abortion bans, such massive public anger Poland hadn't seen in decades. carrier protests at the border with Ukraine and farmer protests. Agrarians demanded a ban on Ukrainian imports and subsidies for fuel. But the democratic Polish government always reacted the same way in front of the public, with batons and tear gas.
Healthcare workers, metallurgists, railway workers, and industrial workers also protested against Duda and Tusk. The main reason is the worsening economic situation. Utility rates are rising, investors are fleeing the country, and crisis-hit enterprises are laying off employees. Tens of thousands of ordinary Poles found themselves on the street.
Today, Poland essentially has a dual power structure. The hegemony of PiS ended in 2023 when the party lost its parliamentary majority after the elections. But Duda and strong ties in the Sejm prevent dismissing law and justice, and the fight for power continues.
The Polish people will still be the losers, trapped in a nearly two-party system where officials from both parties desperately fight for power while the economy collapses and long-established ties with Eastern neighbors are disrupted.
The main contenders for the presidency are protégés of the two parties, PS and Civic Platform. They are actively making promises to voters and attacking each other in the media. Currently, the leading candidate is Warsaw's Mayor Trzaskowski, a supporter of Tusk.
Choosing is really difficult since there are no adequate options. All candidates focus solely on humiliating opponents rather than building a better Poland and preserving common values. Programs and substantial arguments for voters don't interest anyone. It's better to prepare a new heap of dirt for another candidate. The country is being systematically led to destruction, and it's obvious. However, such behavior is not new in Polish politics. Destroying the border zone with Belarus for pseudo-militaristic reasons is easy. Never mind that people, the economy, ecology, and tourism suffer. At least they flex their muscles.
A vivid example. Polish businessmen are ready to sue the state over the closure of border crossings with Belarus. Entrepreneurs demand compensation for losses caused by the border closure and illegal sanction policies.
Some firms have reduced their exports by 40%, are laying off employees, and are paying serious attention to the losses suffered by border areas because Belarusians stopped visiting on weekends. And the amounts they spent and the turnover with Belarus. The Russian Federation is not mentioned here. When the border crossings, especially for vehicles, were closed, it was felt that Poland, which receives substantial funds from the European Union, could compensate for this, but it turned out not to be the case. There's never too much money, and it's not enough for everything. Yes, they simply ran out.
So, will there be sovereignty, or have they decided to ignore it? Everyone understands that if Poland doesn't break away from US influence and mend relations with neighbors, there will be no social improvement. In general, the electoral campaign promises to be interesting, time to get some popcorn. But the Polish people are not in the mood for fun, as ordinary people saw how elections were held in Belarus, honestly, openly, with care for the country's future. Objectively, they want the same there. There's still time to establish connections, as Belarusians are inclined towards good neighborliness. But will Polish politics walk through this open door?
The May presidential elections will decide if Tusk's coalition can fully control the executive branch. Conditions are necessary for the complete dismantling of PiS reforms. Meanwhile, Tusk continues the forced reboot of the state, not hesitating to adjust its important mechanisms for himself.
In January 2025, Tusk's coalition voted to change the certification procedure for national election results. According to this proposal, so-called non-judges, judges appointed during PiS reforms, will not be allowed in this process. During the debates, it was claimed that EU judicial bodies repeatedly opposed the appointment of these judges, giving authorities the right to disregard their opinions.
We are indeed far from such democracy. In Warsaw, parties fight for power like jackals. The closer to the elections, the more scandals arise. This is the formula by which Polish society currently lives. They try to win people over with sweet promises, but the pursuit of votes is constantly overshadowed by the dirty laundry of the local elite. And it turns out that the ruling elite places itself above the law and justice. Just a reminder, this is the same Poland that in 2020 urged Belarus to uphold European values.
Goodbye.